session of Growth Committee for City St. John for November the 19th. I'd like to welcome you, and I'll ask for a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting. Councillor Ogden, seconder. Councillor Lowe, thank you. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, any motion's carried. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda, please? Councillor Ogden, Councillor Lowe, all in favor? Thank you very much. Disclosures of conflict of interest. Not seeing anyone. Move on.
Well,
Beg your pardon?
sorry, John, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, just making sure. I guess it's not a conflict of interest, but I should make it known that I am involved with the Vacant to Vibrant initiative, which is brought up on our gap analysis conversation that's coming up. So no conflict, but involvement with that initiative just for disclosure purposes.
Okay, appreciate the transparency, Councillor. Okay, item 6.1, over to you. Amy.
Thank you, Deputy. Just before we get started, I just wanted to introduce some of the new faces around the room. First of all, I'd like to start with Fabricio Lima. He's our new growth manager. Fabricio's on week three with us. And so he'll be a face you'll be seeing around this table. And as we moving forward with our growth agenda, I also want to introduce Ian McKinnon, who is the new GM of St. John Industrial Parks, takes that position November 25th, I think. Yeah. And Jeff, I see a new face with you, and I'm sorry, I'm not familiar. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. And I think you know everybody else. Yes? He has been. He's a new face at this table today. Yeah.
Okay. Okay,
All right.
thank you.
So thank you for indulging me there. And so we'll start with item 6.1. And for this item, I'm pleased to introduce Carrie Smith, who you have all seen before, but Carrie is the project manager on the Housing Accelerator project. She's going to provide a brief background for this item, the Governance Reform Initiative, and introduce the consulting team who are going to present findings from the existing conditions assessment and the gap analysis as part of the first phase of this initiative under governance reform. So with that, I will hand it over to Carrie. Thank you.
Do we have, Ken, would you mind bringing up the presentation?
Yep, I'll do that for you now.
Thanks. And if you could move to slide 2. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and members of Growth Committee. Today we are providing an update on the Governance Reform Housing Study, and I just wanted to provide a recap of kind of how we got here. So back in September 2022, Council resolved to have staff investigate the creation of a municipal housing entity. They took that away. And as a result, Action 6B was added to the Affordable Housing Action Plan, which was adopted by Council. And that was to investigate potential governance enhancements in 2023, including but not limited to a municipal housing entity. So it's really to look at what governance levers we can pull, not just the creation of a housing entity. With that, Growth Committee actually ended up directing that the investigation be delayed in favor of applying for CMHC's Housing Accelerator Fund. And this investigation was subsequently added as an initiative under the program. SHS Consulting was hired to support this, and today we have Ed Starr with SHS Consulting and Ken Folds with Refact Consulting, who will be reviewing the findings of the existing conditions assessment and the gap analysis, which is part of the Phase A for this initiative. And just a little background, Ed is a founding partner of SHS Consulting and has over 50 years of professional experience in the housing sector and is widely recognized for his accomplishments, including but not limited to housing policy, research, feasibility studies, and governance models. And Ken Folds is the principal with RFAC Consulting, and Ken has worked professionally in the housing planning and development fields for over 35 years. So with that, I'll hand it over to Ken and Ed to take you through the presentation.
Thank you very much, Carrie. A pleasure to be with you all this morning to, in the brief time that we have with you, just to give you a sense of some of the preliminary findings with regards to the study. As Carrie mentioned, we're looking at possible governance reform models, including a housing municipal entity. And that work is really divided into two pieces: an existing conditions assessment and gap analysis, which we'll talk about today, and a second piece which will follow related to the actual analysis of looking at specific models and providing a recommendation thereafter. Important to note that there is a framework and a system in which housing operates nationally, and that has implications that filter through down to the local level. Most of you are aware of the National Housing Strategy, which the federal government launched around 2017, which is a key focus of their housing work. They also have a number of other programs and research. The province has its legislation, programs, and responsibilities. At the regional level, there are some agencies, boards, and commissions, including a newer entity on the Regional Service Commission side. And then there's, of course, the traditional roles that municipalities would play with land use planning, growth management, etc. So important to note that there's sort of a hierarchy that's connecting all of these various levels of government with associated players in that space. Since, as many of you might know, our firms completed the housing needs analysis 2 years ago in the action plan, so we're quite familiar with the local environment. That said, much has changed in the last couple of years, certainly at both the federal and provincial level. Certainly, we've seen some different types of program launches federally. You've seen the evolution of Housing NB provincially, and again, the emerging role of regional service commissions, which are out there in the space. We also know that locally things have been very active over the last couple of years. There's been some shifts in terms of the pressures in the housing market that we've seen. Certainly an emergence of more homelessness that's more visible, and certainly St. John isn't alone in these pressures. They're being seen in many communities across the country. And with that, there's also been more activity in terms of the funding programs through the Rapid Housing Initiative, Housing Accelerator Fund, and these have all fostered additional space and opportunities to help deal with some of the persistent housing problems in the community. As we mentioned, housing is a system, and when you map out, the various players and responsibilities, it can be quite daunting, and there's no reason to or no surprise that it's quite complex in nature. You can see here on the bottom, we've got the housing continuum from those who are unhoused and at risk of homelessness through to the homeownership market. And part of our role is to look at all of the housing issues along that continuum. And when we map out the different players and partners that are involved within that system, you can see that coordination and alignment becomes quite important in terms of dealing with those perspective areas of the continuum and the problems that exist in those areas. Through our investigations and research, we did find that there's a lot of activity through some of the existing more traditional players in the local system, like St. John Nonprofit and Housing Alternatives, who have continued to play a significant and experienced role. There's also been some other housing providers who have been engaging in some additional activities, particularly in the last few years. And these tend to be, in the case of both Kaleidoscope and Outflow, a bit more on the supportive and transitional end of the spectrum. Habitat for Humanity, as many of you know, are engaged in the affordable home ownership space. There's some other notable entities that are involved in that space as well. Housing NB has a fairly significant existing footprint, but is also planning for new developments. We also have some other existing providers like the Homeless Hub, Coverdale, and Partners for Youth. What has been interesting in the last couple of years is the emergence of a new nonprofit player, Steepleview Developments, and also the inclusion of two significant private sector partners who are looking to build both rental and affordable rental as part of what they're doing. Another more recent entrant is the Vacant to Vibrant initiative, which is really looking at renovation and rehabilitation, which is a little different than most of the other examples we've listed here, which are really focused on new construction. We also just note here that the St. John Land Bank obviously plays a role. So what's important in all of this is that there's a range of partners out there who have existing housing that they're owning and operating. They are building new, and there are plans for more, both from sort of the usual suspects, the established partners, and some newer partners who are coming to the table. It's important to also, in that context, understand some of the other work that the city's been doing in this space. The city's been active in trying to facilitate housing outcomes, both through the delivery of the RHI program, the Housing Accelerator Fund, and the various initiatives under it. And we note that you'll be getting a report on that later on in today's agenda. There's also the action plan and the activities that have been associated with those initiatives, and ongoing work in terms of dangerous and vacant buildings. Associated with some of those programs are the delivery of tools and incentives, which have largely happened in the last calendar year or so, through incentives that are enabled both by HAF grants and by city resources. There's also a whole area of policy and regulation that's happening there as well, and a lot more effort through the housing and homelessness piece that's been important. So the important thing here, I guess, in terms of what we've been seeing across the continuum, that there's a number of players, both traditional and new, who are facilitating the development of affordable housing across the continuum of housing options that exist out there. There's also a wide range of initiatives that the city is facilitating or working with to help address those housing issues that we see across the spectrum. Our general observations then, in terms of looking at what's happening in the space, as we were charged to do through this first part of the analysis, is that certainly there's a lot of active proponents in the space. They're taking up on the programs and offerings that are being made, both locally and through other levels of government. They've been successful in getting some of that development entrenched, so there's some early wins there. And there's a lot more in the pipeline that they're planning to bring to the table. The encouraging thing is that that's happening across the entire continuum, from sort of the bottom end of shelters, emergency, transitional, and supportive, all the way up to affordable rental, and in some cases, some affordable ownership. They tend to be a bit smaller in scale. They're really focused on new development, less so on the renovation and rehabilitation of existing stock. There has been some engagement with the private sector, but if there were two areas we could point to where there seems to be gaps in terms of production right now, it would be the mid-market levels as it relates to semi-detached row units of that nature that are available in the stock, and also some of that attention being paid to existing stock, which is an important part and important both to consider new and existing stock. But given the supply and age of the stock in the city, this is another area that we think might deserve a little bit more attention. With that, I'll turn it over to Ed to talk about some of our feedback we've been getting from the community.
Great. Thanks a lot, Ken. So as part of phase one of our work, we went out to the community, to stakeholders who are familiar with housing issues around St. John, and some who've been more active in the market, and put to them a range of questions about both their goals and actions, and also their views on what would be the most appropriate role for the city, and in particular for a municipal housing entity. So I'm going to take you through the feedback we got very quickly. So we did a number of key informant interviews with a cross-section of community stakeholders, both public sector, nonprofit, and the private sector. And we also met with a number of city staff who are involved in the delivery of programs. Pardon me. And general observations, the recent infusion of external funding, such as the Housing Accelerator Fund, is helping to foster housing activity and creation of new units. And as Ken said, more new supply than rehab, although we're pleased to see the Vacant to Vibrant initiative in particular. City facilitation of programs and approvals is having an overall positive effect, but there's a real challenge with coordination given all the stakeholders and levels of government. Efforts to streamline and support development are welcome, but there is actually a limited appetite for additional bureaucracy, and therefore there is some resistance to the idea of another entity. There remains a lack of clarity around defined roles, responsibilities, coordination, and alignment within the local housing system, which shows the importance of coming to grips with this in phase two of our work. Okay. These are the perspectives we heard from the stakeholders about the current city role. In terms of challenges, assuming some programs are more troublesome than expected and others less so. So there's kind of an uneven delivery of these programs. Coordination internally between departments is better, but there's still room to improve. And there was some concern that there may not be, total communication or transparency between departments. Private sector engagement remains a work in progress. We're seeing a lot of activity from the nonprofit sector and affordable housing, not so much from the private sector. Homelessness has been a very upfront issue that has absorbed a lot of oxygen in the room, i.e. It's really dominated the discussion, whereas the need for just expanding supply of all forms of particularly rental housing is important. And then we heard that questions are lingering about having the necessary resources to get the job done. So some of the incentives are good, and the staffing is helpful, but of course everybody wants to see more resources devoted to this whole exercise. There were some opportunities identified. There's clear support for the delivery of incentives and pre-development assistance. Project facilitation and applicant advice are welcome. The city's been playing a good role, and people are looking to see expansion of that. More collaborative and inclusive engagement with community partners since the Housing Action Plan. There's been active connection of partners and development proponents the city has been playing a strong role in linking these, and there's an opportunity to enhance that, providing leadership and planning to address issues and focus on priorities, and advocacy to higher levels of government. These are all opportunities to expand the city's role. Further, other challenges, capacity and knowledge among smaller proponents is lacking, so they do need that kind of advice and support. Program rules are not always suitable, especially for smaller project realities. Some of the CMHC programs, for example, only permit larger developments and make it difficult to move forward with smaller initiatives. General system awareness and coordination among stakeholders is a challenge. They have an uneven level of knowledge and ability to deal with it. And then limits to financial resources and ability to assume risk, especially again among some of the providers, especially in the nonprofit sector, are a challenge. But further opportunities that were identified, the city has established proponents' ability to continue delivering housing. Newer proponents are getting more involved. There's more options to access social investment and land through some of the recent programs. There's an interest in a broader mix of housing types being developed. So as Ken showed, there's housing being developed all across the continuum, which is a very welcome. And there's more room for dialogue and engagement with the city to enhance the city's role. And then we asked specifically on a municipal housing entity. And you can see from the number of bullets, there's more challenges than opportunities that have been identified among stakeholders. So some of the challenges would be that a municipal housing entity would not be resourced for discretionary work. So they would be very focused on specifically their mandate to perhaps develop housing, and there wouldn't be an opportunity for other forms of support. There's concerns about added layers in a relatively small but established ecosystem, i.e. diverting resources. So if a municipal housing entity were to be established, it might chew up resources that are otherwise available generally. Having meaningful community say and autonomy in setting the agenda and direction of a municipal entity is a concern. So how it's governed, how it makes decisions, how it involves the community are issues that would have to be looked at. Concerns were expressed that there's actually limited city housing experience on the ground, i.e. in the development and management of housing. And so this entity would have to be reliant on partners, which might beg the question about is it appropriate when there are many partners already experienced and active, and a risk of a shift in focus away from community capacity and investment towards this municipal entity. If the city only has so many resources financially and in terms of experienced staff resources, might this pull some of the resources away from the community? The opportunities, we heard that formalizing the role of a municipal housing entity would provide clarity on their service boundaries and focus and how they could work together with the community. There would be continuity and alignment with existing city functions, and a municipal housing entity, of course, could have access to city resources. So this is what we heard. Other perspectives in terms of challenges, there would be system issues with coordination and awareness, and concern about structure and misalignment of certain government programs and initiatives. Again, if it were in the hands of a more or less independent municipal housing entity. The opportunities, one interesting opportunity that we did speak to the Regional Service Commission, and they felt they may be able to provide greater access to provincial dollars through a municipal housing entity. So for that reason, it does have some intriguing potential. And then, of course, having a municipal housing entity would heighten awareness and attention to housing issues. So what this points to, from what we heard from the stakeholders and the gap analysis that we did carry out, I think we're hearing there is a role for municipal government in housing, but it needs to be very carefully scoped. Stakeholders are wary of adding more bureaucracy to the system in terms of another entity. There are concerns about the ability to sustain the role in the absence of senior government funding if some of the current housing programs were to disappear or some changes in government might change the direction. Then there were concerns about how you would sustain a municipal housing entity. And working with partners more collaboratively would yield more beneficial results, is what we heard widely. Some of the unknown factors, the regional service commissions and the role they will have regarding housing and homelessness, and a possible shift in provincial perspectives on the housing role with the new government. We are trying to get a handle on how they view some of these ideas and would lend their support. And then finally, of course, implications of a federal election on the current offering of federal programs in the future and how this might affect a municipal housing entity and the role of the city in general. So what are the next steps in the process? As we mentioned, we're going into phase 2, which will establish governance principles for the city's role, determine evaluation criteria for assessing the different options on the city's role, defining prospective models that might comprise the city's role, doing some comparative analysis of what we've seen in other parts of the country, and then finally recommendations on what's in the best interest of the city of St. John and meeting the housing needs of the area. So this is kind of where we're at and where we're heading, and we're pleased to answer questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Ed and Ken. Do you have any questions from the council?
Yeah, I do, John.
Councilor Harris, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you, gentlemen. And of course, again, have to precursor this with the idea that I am part of this emerging group in the nonprofit sector. And was happy to do my interview with you guys. And I guess my big concern comes to with the municipal housing entity is that when I do an analysis from a governance perspective around successful municipalities even globally that have been able to avoid or significantly reduce the pressures and the impact of this housing crisis that is a bit of a global phenomenon for Western countries. You know, I look to places like Yonkers, New York, or like Vienna, Austria, and look to places like Minnesota and inner city Detroit. And it seems to be that it's only when the community has a coordinated approach that has real governance capacity and mandate, like a municipal housing corporation or something like that, that you get those outcomes. So I hear what you're saying about there being concerns, but I wonder if it isn't because if it's not like the level of concerns, like you pointed to the idea that we have a lot more concerns about there being a municipal housing entity because of perceived government overreach or perceived like lack of resources. I think it's important to note that the city was a major housing player for the better part of a century. There are multiple neighborhoods that exist today that were built by taxpayer dollars through the municipality from as early as the 30s right up until the 80s. And, you know, that was one way in which we solved the housing crisis coming out of the post-World War II era. So if not that, if we don't go back to that solution, I guess what is the idea? When I see you point to this perspective that there might be more juice if we squeeze on the collaboration front, I guess the problem I have there is as a municipality, we're still allowing a lot of low-hanging fruit that exists, and you identified it around the existing housing stock, for one, in this city, where you have 150 abandoned buildings and you have a number of provincial and in some cases federal assets that are vacant, that don't have any planning associated with them. That's the area I wonder if we don't get those results like we have gotten with St. John Energy, right? If we were pitching the idea of standing up an energy utility today, if we didn't have one, you'd be hard pressed not to see the same type of feedback from the community. But I don't think anybody in this room would argue with the idea of having St. John Energy as being better than just being underneath NB Power. It's produced staggeringly good results for our municipality. So I guess on that front, I'm leery of some of the perspective offered in the report. Not that I don't think you're making it up. I think people obviously have those concerns, but I don't think we did a great job sort of putting in the window the potential, because we didn't really iron out a model of the Municipal Housing Corporation, what it would do, how it would act. Sure, there's the idea of resources, but managing buildings and taking rents and being in the residential game is a lot different than being in the commercial game. I've heard said around this table a lot that the city's not a good landlord. But I think that's because we look at our relationship with more commercial sector folks than we do residential.
Councillor Harris.
Yeah, sorry.
Councillor Harris, we're at 4 minutes. I know you have to leave. Did you have a question that we can get answered for you before you have to go?
I'm just offering my perspective here on the report. It's not about questions. There's nothing really to question here. This is what the gentleman heard. So
okay. All right, we'll have to come back to you then. We're going on 5.
Sure.
Okay. Councillor Lowe? Oh, I thought maybe you had a question. Okay, no, I just want to make a comment here while I have the chance. When we talk about the unknown factors, it's probably the most important thing in the whole report, because really anything that we're going to do here is going to rely on what the RSC's role is going to be with the new government. Is it going to be the same, or is it going to be tweaked? And as far as the provincial government's concerned, what direction they want to go. And maybe they want to pull back on some of the responsibilities that they're giving to the RSCs. We don't really know. And then, of course, we have a federal election coming, and is the funding going to be brought to an end? Does that mean that possibly we would have initiatives underway, and then all of a sudden the money stop and those initiatives be left in limbo? So in my opinion, those unknown factors are extremely important, and I'm glad that they're recognized in this report. Councillor Ogden, did you have any questions or anything? No? Okay. So on that then, I guess, did you want to make a comment? No? I guess we'll have a motion then for receive and file for the information. Councillor Long, Councillor Ogden, on the question, all in favor? Thank you very much. Okay. Oh. Brett, are you still on?
Yeah, I am. Sorry, the call just dropped for some reason. I got hit with a Teams warning. It was strange. Yeah, I'm still here.
Oh, okay. All right. Did you have something you wanted to add to that, Brent?
No, I guess I'm a little disappointed with sort of the direction here. I mean, we were really hoping to get, when we passed that motion, Councillor Killen and I, we were really, and again, it's not a knock against the work of Ed and Ken here, because I know they're doing what we asked. We were really hoping to see the art of the possible around housing and housing leadership. Not get bogged down in some specific details before we gazed on, what is possible around municipal ownership of a problem. That was the piece that I was hoping to see here, which we're not getting. And I wonder if that's not where we need to move next.
Okay. Go ahead, Ed.
Mr. Chair, just to comment, so that is part of our next phase, to really take a close look at various housing models that have been introduced in Canada and elsewhere. And, if we are able to identify, some very strong examples that could serve St. John, this is still not out of the question.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we've got the motion, it's been passed, so we'll move on now to 6.2.
I'll do the
And
introduction.
Amy, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Deputy. I'm pleased to introduce Jeff Sear for our next item, the Executive Director of Economic Intelligence and Real Estate with Envision St. John. And Jeff is here this morning to provide us with a snapshot of our industrial sector, its importance, challenges, and opportunities. And I also see Andrew Beckett is here as well. Thanks, Jeff. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Can everyone hear me all right? Perfect. Oh, sorry.
On the screen. Just not 100% sure, Councilor Harris.
Is there anybody on the screen right now that can't see the presentation? Oh, I guess not. Yeah. Yeah, you had to go to St. Stephen. Okay, go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, thank you very much.
Who's that? Can you see it now? Richard? Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I just want to kind of open up, what we're here to talk about, as Commissioner Papenroth alluded to, is, we want to talk about the industrial sector. This has been a very busy and active sector in the last year or so, both in terms of public things that are happening publicly, as well as stuff behind the scenes in terms of changes in the landscape. But specifically, what we want to talk about is just what our industrial base is, why it's important, kind of put that in context of some of the challenges that we've had in this area historically from a growth perspective, and some of the emerging opportunities that are really changing kind of our focus as an agency and the focus of both national and provincial investment attraction organizations. So I'm just going to start off with why the industrial sector is important within the region. Little bit of background, discussing what's an economic base. The industrial sector is really important to our economic base. And when I talk about economic base, we're talking about a small portion of jobs in the region that are really focused on providing products, services that are exported outside of the region, outside of the province, and outside of the country. So they're really the engine that drives the local economy here. So, when you put it in context, what is the economic base? Looks like our fonts are having some issues with this laptop. But what is our economic base? Well, basically, your economic base are key export-focused jobs. So manufacturing would be one, tourism would be another. Things like contact centers were brought in the 90s to fill gaps and losses in our economic base. This would support things like community-based jobs, which are focused on local services, and in its entirety, this supports your local population. So in context, what does our economic base look like in the St. John region? This work was done by Metro Economics, a consulting firm that we hired for our population projections, I believe was the basis for the city's projections as well. The economic base that they identified was about 48% from our industrial base, which is probably conservative. There's probably a little bit in the finance, business, and services, as well as the logistics sectors that are probably servicing the economic base. So it's a big part of our economy here, locally and regionally. In terms of what does that look like with regards to what our economic base supports, well, our total economic base in the St. John region is a little over 11,000 jobs. These are jobs that are focused on bringing money into the region through exporting services and goods. There's about 43,000 jobs that are community-based jobs that are providing services locally within the community. And as of the 2021 census, which this data is based on, that this base supported a population of about 130,000 people. So you factor, what our industrial and manufacturing base supports, and these are probably conservative numbers. They're extrapolated from the main economic base, but what I would say is, generally speaking, our industrial base pays higher wages than other sectors like tourism would. So this would be conservative. The impact would likely be a little bit greater. But our industrial base represents about 5,300 jobs, which would in turn support a little over 20,000 community-based jobs. And when you look at our regional population, you can probably link about 60 to 65,000 of our population, almost 50%, to this base. So when your economic base performs well, it has positive impacts on the upstream or downstream community-based jobs and population. When it struggles, it has negative implications. And that's something in St. John, we've seen. We've lived through it. Some of us grew up through it. In the 1980s, 90s, early 2000s, not just in St. John, but the manufacturing sector in North America faced decline, largely because international competition was undercutting local industries in certain sectors. We had a less competitive cost environment than overseas manufacturers, and those that were able to keep things working, keep their business viable in North America had to do through productivity enhancements. So we saw deindustrialization in North America and in Canada. It hit places that were legacy industrial centers and manufacturing centers, and more export oriented, harder than other areas. So St. John would fall in that cart in terms of impact during the 90s and 80s. And some older areas had trouble because they didn't have the strength and the assets to very quickly and efficiently transition their economy to other service-based sectors. So in the St. John region, we saw this in the 90s. The impact was pretty significant. That was really the peak of the negative impact. Our industrial base in that time period, from about 1981 to about 1986 to about 2016, declined by about 32%. You can see the correlation between the decline in our industrial base and the population declines that we saw in the 1990s, early 2000s, in particular. The speculative boom around the refinery bumped it up a little bit in the mid 2000s, but that again contracted again. And some of the things that were driving this were things like declining of the shipbuilding industry. We saw a closure of things like Labatt's Brewery, Atlantic Sugar Site. We also saw Edvitel as well, which is not part of the manufacturing base. But generally speaking, from the standpoint of how it impacts municipalities and regions differently, this is kind of a comparison between how the economic base in St. John performed versus the economic base in Moncton. So over that same period, we saw the industrial and manufacturing base in Moncton actually increase by about 32%. And the point behind that was Moncton had a newer manufacturing economic sector, didn't have as many legacy industries like St. John had, but they weren't export focused. So they're more regional. Moncton's position in Atlantic Canada is right in the center of it. A lot of their economic and manufacturing development serviced the Atlantic region and didn't have to compete overseas. So I use the example of the Molson plant, which you see on the highway driving by Moncton. That plant is scaled to serve product to the Atlantic Canadian market. So comparatively, St. John struggled during this period because our industries were a little older and they're focused on export and struggled to compete with foreign markets. So from that standpoint, we've seen contractions and challenges in this sector, but there's also changes that are coming right now that better position the St. John region to compete. And so there's an opportunity right now for this to become something that in recent decades been a challenge to our economy, to flip it and turn it into a strength. So what's happening? Well, there's been a number of geopolitical shifts, things like adaptation to climate change, adaptation to the pandemic, shifting geopolitical circumstances globally. Like there's a lot of uncertainty. And a lot of these things are starting to tip the scales in St. John's favor, particularly in a number of industrial and manufacturing industries. And this could be a game changer. What we're not going to see is things like, your clothes aren't going to have a made in Canada tag. What we'll probably see is more so industries with complex labor force and technical needs look back to North America, and they already are starting. What are some of those trends? One is still early on. It's reshoring and it's the friendshoring trends. After things like the war in Ukraine, we're seeing a trend to in certain sectors of the industrial manufacturing sector to look back, to be closer to their markets and to shrink and de-risk their supply chains. So there are more industries that are starting to look to North America. This represents a significant opportunity for St. John given our strengths. The second is the energy transition. As the world starts to move more and more in the direction of net zero and reducing greenhouse gases, there's a lot of new technologies, new processes, and new systems that are going to need to be invested in. So really, we're facing a generational opportunity from the standpoint of manufacturing and investment that we're very well positioned for, particularly given our strengths and clusters in the energy sector. The third factor is really a post-COVID thing. Industrial land has been getting more challenging. So in response to the pandemic, a lot of businesses moved from what was just termed to be a just-in-case mindset, where you kept as little stock as possible, to a just-in-time mindset, where you keep as little stock as possible, to a just-in-case mindset, where you want to have extra stock and product available in warehousing. So warehousing demand has shot up, increased. It's resulted in significantly higher land prices in other markets and additional land scarcity. So, for example, industrial land in the GTA right now is going for over $1 million an acre, which makes competition from Ontario something that's not as daunting as maybe as it was 10 years ago. And the last piece is our industrial supply chain, already strong. Things like the modernization of the port, introduction of CPKC, making us the only center east of Montreal with 3 Class 1 railway access, is also another leg up and significant advantage for us. And this slide is, showing some images, and I want to speak to it just because, when you're trying to grow an economy, it's important to leverage some of your strengths. And given some of the emerging opportunities, there's a number of things in this region that we've got that no one else in Atlantic Canada could have. So I like to use the example of Courtney Bay, the port on Courtney Bay. It's not one we talk about as often, but there are a lot of unique products, chemicals that are brought in through that port that you can't really easily bring in anywhere else. Billions of dollars to build that somewhere else, and we've got it right here. Means that we're going to be more attractive for certain types of industries than other locations. So, what are some of the emerging opportunities? And I'll open this up with this is very new. We've been starting to deal with this behind the scenes and getting a lot more interest over the past, I would say, 10 to 16 months. And we're further unpacking it, but there's some that are more visible, and then there's going to be future ones that we identify through additional work that we'll be doing. I would say one of the big ones where we line up very well is within the battery supply chain in Canada. Right now, Canada has actually been identified by third-party groups like Bloomberg as the #1 country to invest in battery supply chain. Makes a lot of sense as the future, shifts to new, environmental energy production systems like wind and solar. They're going to need more energy storage. Again, the emergence of EVs are going to drive a lot of growth in the battery supply chain. we're recognized as being very competitive in Canada. We've got new investment tax credits that help to support that. In the St. John region, the St. John region is very competitive, has a strong value proposition because of our established port and capacity for growth. We've got fairly robust chemical supply chain that I would say no one really in the Maritimes could compete with. We have 3 Class 1 railways. We've got a large industrial labor force. We've got a diverse and highly non-emitting electricity grid, which is quite important. Our St. John Water's raw industrial water supply is unique and a very significant asset. And we've got very nimble, as a small province, nimble post-secondary institutions. The other one that we're seeing interest in is green hydrogen. Again, it's expected to be an important energy source in the future, specifically around things like heavy transportation and industrial operations. So again, St. John's identified by the province, along with Beldoon, as one of 2 hydrogen hubs for the province. And, we've got a really strong value proposition here. Again, with our port, our chemical supply chain through existing port facilities, our raw water service, our energy supply. In this sector, hydrogen, we have something, that a lot of places don't, called, potential off-takers or local users of hydrogen. Helps to de-risk a investment in a facility if you've got some local demand and some export demand. And, we've got a lot of efficiencies in coordination with our local industry. That would be an opportunity not a lot of areas have. Then the last one is really our port and logistics. We've seen the port grow for the last number of years. It's projected to grow even more. They've added almost 700 jobs to the economy over the past 5 years. The addition of CP, DP World and CPKC add a lot of strengths. Right now, we've seen the port go from about 150,000 TEUs to about, 75,000 to about 150,000 TEUs, expected to continue to grow. And there's a possibility and an opportunity to leverage this growth to try and, develop an offsite logistics park for the region and try and keep some of that container traffic here and keep some of the economic spinoff from it. One thing that I would like to say is, what we're starting to see in terms of new and emerging industries are a little bit different. Like, we're seeing a lot of the interest is really through the energy transition, new technologies, new projects, new processes. So there is, I would say, significantly kind of, it's not the industry of old. A lot of it is a lot cleaner, and that's the reason why they're making these investments, is to transition this type of production. So we're seeing a lot more industries that want to primarily or entirely use grid electricity instead of generating things with byproducts. We're seeing things like hydrogen, which, uses electricity to produce hydrogen from water. And we're just seeing a generally more environmentally friendly or environmentally focused manufacturing investment opportunity. It doesn't mean there's not outputs for different things, and industries would need to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. But generally speaking, what we see is a lot greener than what we've used to see. So in terms of what we need to do as a region to be ready to capture some of this opportunity, and from our perspective, we see this as a very unique, once-in-a-generation opportunity that we shouldn't miss, is sites. At this point, I believe the St. John Industrial Parks, their study that was done by Deloitte said that there was a lack of available industrial land. What we would say is, since this study, the size and scale of industrial land required, based off the opportunities that we see emerging, has only gotten larger and more complicated. So this is a challenge, but one that we think can be addressed, and can become not just a challenge, but an opportunity and an advantage for the region. Services, generally speaking, they'll need industrial and potable water supply, highway access, and significant electrical transmission requirements, particularly green energy required. These are things that regionally, provincially, we're able to do. They need speed. They need speed. They need clarity in terms of their investment. So it doesn't mean you need to pre-approve a specific development, but what we do need to figure out as a region to be able to compete is to figure out how we can get land prepared in time so that we can maintain timelines for projects that are consistent with other jurisdictions that we would be competing with in other markets. So again, what we want to kind of leave with the key takeaways from this presentation is just our industrial base is an important part of our economy. It's still important to transition and diversify the economy, but it's still a very important part. The second is, the trends are tipping in our favor, again, from an industrial investment and development standpoint. And it's going to be a unique opportunity that, quite frankly, is a once in a generation opportunity for this region and for the city. And we need to find a way to capitalize on it. Open it to questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeff. Questions, Councillor Long?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. The first part of it is 4 years old. And that's disappointing because it dates back to 21. The second part, as you get near the end of it, it is so important. And when I look at, we seem to be putting a lot of energy into batteries where it's going the other way. And I just read an article last night in Sweden, and they're closing a plant because they can't produce enough, etc. They can't even get anywhere near producing enough, right? But we operated, you compare us to Moncton. Sometimes I don't like to be compared anywhere. We should exist on our own because they don't have a harbor. They don't have all the things you said here. Yeah. But what they did have for years is industrial parks. And if you look at the Molson one, you give an example on the highway, that's in an industrial park. We went to sleep for 4 or 5 years. We built a barge terminal, then we went to sleep and we did nothing. And now all of a sudden, the new city manager and a committee's formed, and we're coming alive again in the industrial park. And I know, John, you want a question. So when I look, it says what we need to be ready. In my opinion, 1, 3, and 4 are all the same. Large sites, approval, and speed, it's all one thing. It's the committee that we have that are meeting with the Lorneville people in Lorneville now, because large sites, they're down there. But we had a problem when we used the word heavy industry. It scared everybody, and rightfully so. I totally agree with them. Approvals, it comes from council, but we are meeting with the Lorneville people. And speed is to get it rezoned so we can do things that you're saying. But what scares me is that and we're all centered on the industrial park in Lorneville, no doubt because of the port, which makes total sense, right? But if we get too many hands dealing in the industrial park down there, I can see we can confuse people and confuse results. Like the city is now, it formed a committee to meet with the Lorneville people. But if Envision got involved with the Lorneville people, and I'm not knocking Envision by no means, but if they did, there's too many hot hands in the pie of getting this thing resolved, because we got to come up with those 3 things right there. It's what we need to be ready. We weren't ready for years. That's why everything went right up the highway to Moncton. And I can give you examples. We didn't have warehouses where we could put things in that people wanted right away. A lot of these big industries want something already built. They want service. They want water. They want electricity. We never had any of that stuff down there because we had a dead industrial park. It was sound asleep. We had no telephone number. We had no web page. We had no nothing.
Counselor
So,
Lowe?
yeah, I got it, yeah.
I'm
I asked
gonna
the
ask you for
question. I
a
did
question here.
I did ask a question. didn't
Okay, let him answer.
Okay, you answer. I'm sorry.
Can you repeat the main question part again?
Yeah, I know I fooled you. didn't I,
Yeah.
okay, good.
Thank you. We're not trying to be involved in terms of the community outreach. In fact, well, we did offer to be part of the committee that was formed to consult with Laurenville to work alongside the city. We're the investment attraction arm. The partnership with St. John Industrial Parks when it gets ramped up is absolutely key, but we're the ones that have got the relationships with Invest in Canada, working with OMB. That's our role in it. We're not trying to complicate the exercise in terms of the approvals at the local level. We're just pointing out that the importance of having the industrial base for this area and the importance of having some of those approvals in place. And we want to be as supportive as we can of the process. We're not trying to complicate it by, you won't see us involved separately with meeting with residents in Laurenville, for example. That is absolutely the city and industrial parks role.
Thank you.
Yeah, what I'd kind of add on that is, what we see our role is making sure the city and industrial parks knows what some of the emerging opportunities are so that they can prepare and be ready for them.
Right. Well, I mean, from my perspective, I think what we're actually showing is, as an industrial city, industry's changing. And to Jerry's point, heavy industry, that term really isn't appropriate anymore, but it's still written down places, it's still being utilized. So, I mean, where we're heading, I think is a very unique area that other places just don't have the capability of, heading there. And it's going to be really good for our economy. It's going to help, boost our city big time. And, unless there's any other questions, I would take a motion to
Can I,
file.
that's exactly what I wanted to hear, just exactly what you said. You get the businesses and Brent, his team will hopefully get agreements to the land to fill out those 3 conditions that Jeff said has to be done. Thank you.
City manager?
Yeah, I would just say that, there's a great working relationship between City of St. John and Envision, and we're working together. And I think everyone knows their lanes in terms of responsibility. And so Jeff and Andrew are out there, as Andrew had mentioned, working with Invest Canada, looking to recruit those opportunities. And then we can provide support. And then at some point, there's a transition. But I think some of the key points that Jeff highlighted today in terms of the strategic advantages of St. John and why it makes sense to invest here and all that we have going for the city. There's a lot in the pipeline, and it's just a matter of time before one of them gets landed. But we do need to be ready.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
a key message for sure.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, Andrew, I want to thank you very much for coming in. We look forward to seeing you from time to time. And I'll take a motion to receive and file for information. Councillor Lowe, Councillor Ogden, on the question, all in favor? Thank you very much. Item 7.1. And over to you.
Yes,
Buckrow?
thank you, Deputy. For the next item, I'm pleased to introduce Andy Reid, who you all know. Andy is our housing manager, as you know. Andy is going to provide the 2024 progress report on the implementation of the city's affordable housing action plan. This is the first progress report that has been presented since the plan was adopted about 2 years ago. There has been a lot of progress on the file with 30 of 39 action items either in progress or complete. And with that, I'll hand it over to Andy for more details.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the Growth Committee. I'm pleased to be here to present the 2024 progress report on the Affordable Housing Action Plan implementation. And I can add to that there has been a tremendous amount of work underway the past 2 years related to implementing this action plan, in addition to the other related initiatives. And while the challenges remain, great, we're in the midst of this, housing situation. When you look at the municipal role in this file, as far as I can tell, the city is firing on all cylinders. So I would commend council for back in 2021 initiating this action plan, and I'm pleased to be here just to highlight some of the some of the results so far. So we're all familiar with a couple of the demographic, economic changes that have been happening over the past 2 years. The population growth in the city, StatsCan has estimated over the past 2 years, the addition of 4,000 new residents. And like elsewhere in Atlantic Canada, affordability issues have become contagious as the pandemic encouraged more interprovincial migration from the very unaffordable larger centers to move here to the Maritimes. Added to that, to meet this demand, economic factors have also presented challenges in the form of increased construction costs, interest rates, the rate of inflation versus income. And as well in St. John, we have we've had inconsistent housing starts over the past few decades, sometimes very low. So these issues have combined to further exacerbate some affordability issues which were already present, but as well just strain the overall housing system, which is very important, obviously, to provide opportunities for folks to live, even if we have these emergent industrial opportunities. As well, there have been several large changes in the housing system, and Ken and Ed touched on these, but I'll just add a few items to it. So since adopting the plan in 2022, October 2022, it's been about 2 years. Of course, we saw the provincial housing strategy, Housing for All, be published in the summer of 2023. There was a large addition to the national housing strategy in March of this year, Canada's housing plan. And as well, the city launched its own Housing for All strategy to tackle homelessness earlier this summer. So these are, on the provincial and federal level, these are two very large shifts, and there continue to be shifts in those plans. We now have, of course, a new provincial government. Even as of today, sort of new announcements being made and committed to regarding items like rent cap and as well as temporary removal of PST on new multi-unit construction. On the federal side, we know the national housing strategy will come to an end. There could be a change in government. So while the time for implementing some of these new initiatives is now, there's an uncertainty there as well. So back in 2022, as I mentioned, this was the adoption period of our Affordable Housing Action Plan. The plan really lays out 6 key areas to create a more coordinated approach in tackling housing gaps, which were identified in a housing needs assessment, largely based on the 2021 census and updated to 2022. So the overall status, when we look at the action plan, as the Commissioner mentioned, the plan is largely underway. There have been 7 actions fully completed, 9 actions that we haven't started, but 30 actions either completed or underway overall. If I give a synopsis of it, the focus has been on improving awareness internally on housing, linking planning and housing in a much greater way. And it's been a real strategic approach in prioritizing where those funding opportunities exist, such as the Rapid Housing or Housing Accelerator Fund, knowing that those opportunities are time limited. So we've been pulling on the largest levers available to us, what our regulations are, where we have the ability to offer incentives to see those housing forms that are desirable, see an increase in those in the city, as well as to help, as well as using our land itself, public land, to help drive more housing projects. And I'd mention for all of those, just a reminder, we do live in this housing system, so there's a real level of coordination that happens day to day with CMHC, Housing New Brunswick, nonprofits and private developers. Of course, CMHC is really a huge determinant with the financing programs they offer. So I'm just going to quickly cover each of the objective areas in the packet. There's a whole itemization of each of the 39 actions and the status, but going to try to give it more of a high level overview for you. And the first objective, improving system awareness and coordination. There have been a lot of achievements, I'd say, here in just setting up the ability to implement the action plan. Internally, we've been able to drive this by the new staff resources, the additional staff resources, temporarily enabled through the Housing Accelerator Fund, which will implement those 8 complementary Housing Accelerator Fund initiatives. We've been able to leverage federal HAF funding to augment that staff complement. So this item, as we've seen earlier today, it does continue to evolve. We're, at the same time we're implementing this action plan, we're also now reviewing how we're implementing it, our governance reforms. So it is a continually evolving situation. I don't think that's a bad thing. It just says that we're being nimble. We're saying, are we hitting all the things we should? And I think we'll have to continue to be nimble given we're operating in this kind of environment of change. The next steps for this objective will be implementing those governance reform findings at stage 2 of the study next year, and as well improving the data gathering, the monitoring of these housing indicators. And this will really help support future city initiatives, upcoming initiatives such as municipal plan review. Second objective, support and invest in non-market housing solutions. So largely, this area has been implemented through different grant and incentive programs launched by the city last year and this year, our Affordable Housing Grant and Affordable Housing Soft Cost Grant Program. To date, there's been just under $2 million committed in grant funds to support deeply affordable housing. That's 247 affordable units that have been targeted through a letter of approval. And when you combine those units, those projects with sometimes they're mixed income projects with the market housing units, that would be 513 just strictly housing supply units overall. And this figure for this year does include the Barrack Green Residence project now underway. And I did want to emphasize on that project, there have been a few speed bumps on it, but that project will add 7 affordable 3-bedroom units, which is just, those aren't built very often, if at all, in this city. So really looking forward to that project, continue to gather steam and to be complete. And did want to recognize Kaleidoscope just for taking the shared risk in that project with the city and delivering it. The next steps related to this theme area will be the ongoing intakes of grants in 2025, as well as pursuing other funding opportunities. The third objective, preserve and improve existing housing stock. So again, to commend council, this objective was really helped by the piloting of additional staff through the minimum standards and vacant building programs. These programs really are critical to helping move forward the needle on existing stock that is in poor condition. It is an area that it's hard to tackle. If I'm being blunt, we've seen some improvement at the provincial level with their plan in upping certain provincial funding amounts for residential rehabilitation program units. But this is an area where more needs to be done. And we are looking as next steps through our urban development incentive review policy. We are looking at vacant building typologies as a possible grant type through that program, but there's really a higher level of resources that are needed here, just given the aged housing stock in the city, the number of buildings. And especially when you add to the business case to redeveloping those as affordable units, there are resources needed to do so. The fourth objective speaks to housing supply more in general, supply and range of affordable housing options. So we've really seen purpose-built rentals apartments take off in St. John over the past couple of years. We have launched a very targeted approach for the missing middle, those initiatives that will help create more townhouses, semi-detached type ownership opportunities. And complementary to that, I'd say, has been that those REOIs that have gone out for city-owned land, which will help drive additional housing. Next steps will include currently the real estate department is driving a municipal land disposition policy work that's underway. And there are other Housing Accelerator Fund related initiatives to that, including our HAF, Housing Accelerator Fund grant, which specifically targets those missing middle housing forms. The fifth objective is to cultivate a more responsive housing system. So this really speaks to the bylaws, the regulations we have in place today, what those are, how they help facilitate housing. So that's a key lever. And zoning reform, the zoning reform project, we know it's currently underway, being driven by the planning staff. That's a very large and important initiative. And that's to be completed by early next year. And there are several other large initiatives that will have policy implications on housing to follow, from the North End Plan to the municipal plan review. So, like I say, firing on all cylinders, the city is really taking a look at existing regulation, and there are other areas here too that we'll continue to delve into. The sixth and final area around leveraging partnerships and resources. This area is really around community collaboration. So as mentioned, we meet regularly with CMHC, Housing New Brunswick, local nonprofits, as well. It's about engaging the private sector. Say there has been some success here. Private sector developers who had no experience including affordable housing units in their projects now are. So it's important from that perspective, as well as just general housing supply, to keep engaging on an annual basis developers. We also support the university. There's the National Housing Day symposium. Actually, there's one coming up this Friday. Next steps for this objective will be, I would say, further coordination at the regional level. There was some interesting information learned through the governance reform, just on what the RSC, what their preliminary role might be, and I guess how we can work as a region on housing issues, as we are a regional housing market. So those are the objectives. Of course, to get down to some of the numbers, the plan did set out aspirational targets. So how do we quantitatively measure progress? And these targets, like I say, they were aspirational yardsticks set out by SHS, but they were broken down into 3 different areas by dwelling type, tenure, and affordability. The definition we use for affordability is the deeply affordable, so paying no more than 30% of the pre-tax income. And we have the dwelling types here, a mix of 35% low density, which would be single family homes, medium density, semi-detached or row houses, and then high density, pretty well synonymous with apartments. New construction, tenureship, it's a little harder to track, but on the next slide, I just have from our 2024 building permits, this is how we're doing. So there's been a notable shift really over the past 10 to 20 years in dwelling types. That in St. John, I think the past year it was 77% of our dwelling types were apartments. Medium density was actually 23%, which is a big improvement from where we have been over the past 2 decades. That missing middle has really been very small historically, and then 12% single family units. This shift is really, it's not just St. John. This has happened across the country. It's even in Quispamsis and Rothesay, there you'll see apartments, and there's been a shift to that. We are probably over the national average with the shift to apartments. And I think it's important to highlight just that we need to, provide that diversity of housing forms for everyone, for people who are looking for an ownership opportunity, ground-oriented units for families who are wanting that kind of option. Affordability in terms of the new construction. This year, we've issued permits for 56 affordable units. So that's 14% of the overall permits. But I'd highlight we're tracking 310, if you include what we're tracking through our grant programs, what's in the pipeline, there's 310 additional affordable housing units we're tracking. So given that in our housing supply growth target over the next 3 years to 2026, it actually works out that we're on track for 30% new construction being affordable. So that was really great to see. And I think it will be important to continue to support those local projects when it comes to, what's at our disposal municipally to make sure they all get over the finish line. Just a few emerging trends to round off the presentation. So household size is also part of the conversation of demographics. Population might increase, but also with an aging population and other factors, we're seeing a shift to smaller households, meaning more people wanting one-bedroom units. It's really just the international immigration and intraprovincial migration that's sustaining the need for larger housing units. And in terms of supply, as noted in the dashboard for the Accelerator Fund, we're issuing probably a record number of residential units and permits. So far this year, the number is actually, I think it's up to 414. So it foreshadows some good strength in housing starts. And again, on dwelling type and tenureship, there's a real dominance of apartment forms. And this has been a consistent trend, not just the past 5 years, but this has been moving the past 10 or to 20 years, but it's getting more so. In the last rental market study for new construction, there's a 0% vacancy rate. So we are a little bit behind in what we see. You really have to talk to those apartment owners to see how they're doing right now with their vacancy rate, because our last report it's already old data. It's coming from last year. In terms of affordability, again, like this is going back to the 2021 census is the way we derive how we're doing. 27% of renters faced affordability issues versus approximately 11% of owners. And those figures are probably they're definitely a lot higher today. The figures are a little bit skewed from the CERB payments coming out of COVID. In the last rental market study, there was a notable increase in average rents, 10% between 2022 and 2023. That's probably speaking to those new projects which are inflating that rent, but it is quite high. In terms of affordability, successful engagement of the private sector at a variety of depths of affordability has been achieved with those housing NB units. But what we're also seeing is they're typically one-bedroom affordable units. So when you have a wait list, a provincial wait list of families, it kind of begs the question, who is providing that form for families? So we really need to see some more. Steeple View, I believe they're doing two-bedroom affordable, but more projects that are fulfilling that need. So again, on household size, we need to continue to enable a diverse array of housing options and forms. We are on track to meet our HAF agreement, which is great. And I think that HAF initiative was a really great example just on how to track progress for housing units. So you could see future city initiatives really following through with similar measurable targets. Dwelling type and tenureship, we will need more missing middle housing forms. And the hope with those forms is you might free up the overhoused population. So seniors who maybe want to downsize and they can't move, they're just staying in their homes, that gets freed up for a family and so forth. Or an entry-level ownership opportunity. In terms of affordability at the municipal level, I think it's ongoing monitoring of of these trends, as well as implementation of the Affordable Housing Action Plan. We have a lot of members in the community with a focus on affordable units. So making sure, as I said, those get across the finish line so we can address the housing gaps identified, as well as an ongoing need to think a little bit strategically about opportunities, just given some of the shift in provincial federal resources, that what kind of service we want to provide over the long term. So that's the presentation. Probably a lot in a box there, but it's been 2 years, so I tried to fit a lot in. And yeah, thank you. I'm happy to take any questions on this progress report.
Okay, thanks very much. Jeff, do we have questions, anyone? No, I just want to say, I think that really a lot of progress here in this report, and that the thing that I can relate to the most is people say they're building a lot of apartments, but what about the houses? And I'm thinking they're not building enough apartments because that's what I want. And then somebody can have my 3-bedroom house, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a lot of people in my generation that are looking to downsize, but they just have to find the right place. And we keep going down this path, and I think we're going to have those places sooner than later. And so that'll free up a lot of homes. So thank you very, very much for coming in and updating us. Could I get a motion to receive and file the presentation, please? Councilor Lowe, Councilor Ogden on the question. All in favor? Thank you very much. Next item, 7.2.
Yes, yep,
Okay.
thank you, Deputy. Just very quickly. David Doblestein, your Director of Growth and Community Support, is here to provide a brief update on some of the recent changes to our Growth and Community Support Services team, and to provide a few highlights about the work that they're doing in the community. Thank you.
Okay, what do you do?
Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon, members of the Growth Committee. So very quickly, this org chart, I know there's been questions from this body before about some of the work that our overall department does in the community. So we're just going to do a bit of a snapshot on sort of one section of our department, so the Growth and Community Services team, sort of essentially broken into 2 teams, one under growth, which is mostly focused on what the work the Growth Committee is interested in doing, and then we have the Community Support Services team. Obviously, a lot of front-facing services here, responsible for recreation programming, community development, inclusion, ProKids, things like all the bookings for all the sports fields and arenas and facilities, running our city-owned community centers, relationships with neighborhood associations, running many of the city's grant programs. And then obviously the growth side of things is looking after strategic growth and economic growth. There's sort of that interface that you heard in the last 2 presentations between housing, industrial opportunities. If there's opportunities that come knocking on the door, it's sort of the growth team that's helping make sure there's receptive support for those ideas. Obviously running the city market, and then your immigration strategy, and our looking after the contract that we have right now with the St. John Local Immigration Partnership, as well as then helping facilitate all of the major special events that the city runs throughout the year, and facilitating third-party events. So there's a lot. And part of the reason I'm showing you this, you can see some positions highlighted in green. Those are staff who are new to those positions in the last 3 months. So there's been some turnover and some churn and some new positions where we have new talented folks. You've already met our new growth manager earlier today, Fabrizio. And then obviously we have some positions highlighted in yellow that right now are currently vacant, we're recruiting for. For instance, we lost our arts and culture coordinator because the residents of West Side decided to elect her as their MLA. So we really wish Kate Wilcott all the best of luck in Fredericton, and we know they're going to have a great champion there. So there's some getting up to speed that's happening, and some new programs obviously that council is wanting to see happen. For instance, we have a new East Side coordinator, manager to help with what we're doing on services for East Side community centers and whether there's opportunities to do more work in the neighborhoods out there. Hopefully have an announcement soon on that position. So a few snapshots on sort of the growth team side of work. So the immigration strategy, the city's immigration strategy launched in November of 2022. Right now, we're working very closely with Envision St. John and the Local Immigration Partnership on regionalizing that strategy, with the idea that there'll be a new iteration of this strategy coming out in the next few months. Some of the actions specific that we're working on right now is an emergency services strategy. So we know, for instance, when some newcomers move to Canada, maybe they're afraid of police officers. Maybe they don't know that 911 is the emergency number you call. So We've done a lot of work with our stakeholders on finding out what is the learnings that we need to do to give information to newcomers when they move here about our firefighters, our police, ambulance services, public health, etc. And now we're going to move into phase 2 where we start actioning some of those things. We have an inclusivity campaign, some anti-racism campaigns that we're working on with our partners in the community that are going to start rolling out in March. Some really good news in terms of our immigration targets. So in the immigration target for the actual strategy call for 12,000 plus permanent residents to move to the region within 10 years. We're already halfway to that target after just 3 years. And in fact, the number here is wrong under the actuals. The actuals are just for the first 2 years. We're anticipating that there's going to be around 2,500 permanent residents coming to the region just this year. We're already at 2,005 as of September. So the most amount we've ever had in decades. And what we're learning from this is 94% of them are choosing to live in the city, right? And there's a lot of reasons for that, but primarily we have a much higher availability of stock of rental market. We have a transit system. We have the university, community colleges, larger bedrooms. Obviously, there's some newcomers who are moving outside the community, but you can see from the data, like most are choosing the city, and that's obviously having an impact on house prices and rental prices. So that's why we need to do more to get more of that housing stock online. But it's also a message to our development community, despite what the federal government has announced recently with a potential reduction, and there will be a reduction in some immigration levels, we're still anticipating to see really strong immigration numbers to St. John. And as our housing manager just said, the message is out about the attractiveness and affordability of the Maritimes, particularly St. John. We can't stop the tide from folks from Western Canada and Southern Ontario moving here for affordable housing. So we just need to build more housing, and we need more options to have those be more affordable. So we're still looking into what the impacts potentially might be on our post-secondary education, because we do know a lot of immigrants come here to study, those temporary permits, and so we're still monitoring that with our local immigration partnership and our partners. So with the local immigration partnership, I think we know, because council has already approved this, there's a transition that's in progress now. We've Envision St. John has applied to take on the contract management of the St. John Local Immigration Partnership starting in April. And so we're working through that right now and still waiting to hear back from the federal government on that. We have a new staff person joining that team here shortly as we start with that transition, and a number of campaigns that the team is working on right now. In terms of some upcoming major events just in the next month or so, and these aren't necessarily ones that the city's running, these are the ones that the Special Event Task Force sort of would help to facilitate. Obviously, I think folks are really excited about the CPKC holiday train that's coming here this week. We're expecting thousands of people to descend next to the TD station. It's the first time it's ever come here. We have a market mingle, which our team is actually coordinating at the city market on the evening of December 5th. It'll be open to everybody. It's a welcome event. It's to help newcomers and oldcomers, new St. Johners, meet old St. Johners, and just start to get the festive spirit underway. And almost a kickoff to the next night, which will also be really crazy Uptown Sparkles, which is hosted primarily by Uptown St. John. There'll be thousands of people all uptown, including at the city market. We have the Mayor's Breakfast coming on December 20th, now called Harbor Lights, which we expect to see most of you there for. And then obviously we're expecting good weather for the New Year's Eve fireworks show. And in terms of the city market, lots of things underway there. We've had a number of vendor changes just this year. So we're really excited with some of the new vendor offerings we have. We have a new bakery who's been really successful, the Charlotte Street Bakery. Joe Samosas opened up mid-year as well. And we have Damascus, who literally just opened in the last few weeks, offering more of Middle Eastern cuisine. Really excited about those offerings. Obviously, we know that Slocum & Ferris closed down earlier this year. They've been around at the city market for over 100 years, had a number of different owners do at that time. We're working now to try to fill that space and reaching out to potential interested tenants. And then we also have some other movements in the market. Java Moose is starting fit up on their space at the bottom of the market. Wild Carrot's going to be moving here shortly. We're still fitting up their new space. And then once they're out of their space, Chicken by Felix is going to move to the space that Wild Carrot's in right now. And then there's more on deck for next year, particularly as we start to implement the city market strategic plan. And on that plan, I'm not going to go over these in detail, but this is just a bit of a snapshot as to some of the work that's already underway on the strategic plan for the city market. We've already done some estimates on some of the capital improvements that need to happen over the 10 years. So we know how to estimate for how much budget we're going to need, both for our own dollars and potentially asking the province and the federal government for monies, potentially in line with the 150th anniversary of the building, which is coming in 2026. We've already implemented core hours now. These are hours where every vendor is going to be there when the market's open. We're really excited about that. We're piloting extended hours on Thursdays, and we're going to reassess at the end of the year whether that's successful or not. And we'll get back to you at that point. We're exploring changes in governance to be more business friendly and quick to respond to opportunities at the market. We're updating our leasing procedures. Obviously, there's been a lot of construction around the city market that I think the public's aware of. We're really pleased that the Charlotte Street project is just about complete. It's, I would say, substantially complete now. The street's back open, so folks should feel equipped that they can come right up to the market again. And then South Market Street, we're hoping to have the lower portion open in time for Uptown Sparkles. Obviously, the upper portion is still going to be closed off to vehicle traffic as 99 King construction is underway for the next 2 years or so. And then obviously the 150th, which we're really excited about. We're going to start preparations underway. We have an implementation manager who's going to be joining the team here soon, and we'll let you know who that is once they join. So with that, Mr. Chair, that's the update. We're happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, David. Any questions? Councillor Law?
I get 2 questions. The tea room on Charlotte Street, is there any word on that? The vacancy that's been there for a while.
Yes, so that's in the work plan for 2025 because there's a significant amount of fit up that needs to happen with that whole front section of the market in terms of some vendor movements. So that'll be one of the first tasks that our new implementation manager will take on with our asset management team.
The second question is, in the chart of the people, there's see when I find it. Correct. Community service manager. No, recruiting for the program manager east side under Jen Reed. What exactly is that?
So this is the new position that council asked us to explore. There was some feelings from council that there may not be enough recreation offerings for the east side community. And so we're looking at what the community centers themselves are offering and whether there's a neighborhood model similar to Pulse or Crescent Valley Resource Center, if there's some equivalent that could be offered on the east side. So that's what they're going to spend all of 2025 doing, is a bit of a gap analysis on service offerings. And then if there's recommendations on new services that could be offered in various communities on the east side, that'll happen in the second portion of the year.
Would they, David, work out of the location when it's put together? Would they be working out of a location in the East St. John area, like Pulse and like the West Side Community Center and that there? Is that the idea?
Mr. Chair, to the councillor. So this staff person is primarily there to help identify the needs and then to potentially help set up some organization, grassroots initiative, we think, potentially, to help run some sort of new community, local grassroots initiative. Don't yet know whether they would be affiliated with having any operational support towards that organization other than getting them up and running. But we don't want to presuppose that outcome before we do the work and analyzing that and then meeting with the various neighborhoods. So they will be out and about in the community, understanding the needs before we do anything.
Okay, well, listen, thank you very, very much. It was a great update. A lot of positive stuff going on, and we're always moving forward. So I'll take a motion to receive and file the report. Councillor Lowe, Councillor Ogden on the question. Okay, Councillor Lowe, over to you. Okay, can I get a seconder? Okay, on the question. Thank you, everybody. That's what you require.